colleagues.
Fine, how you doing, sir?
All right.
See you, both of you, all of you.
Good morning, everyone. We are just settling in up here around the dais, and we are going to call this meeting to order. I did want to say a couple of things before we get started, that the mayor is out of town in Colorado, representing the city and speaking at a conference, and it is about the environment and greening. So in keeping with many of her goals, she is following up and representing us well. And Commissioner Reppert is going to be back with us tomorrow. He's been out of town as well. So I just want to say that I see our new Chief of Police here today, and welcome. Congratulations, Eric Payne. Several of us were with you last night. Okay, well, we are going to begin this morning with a presentation about an award that the city received from Governing Magazine and Living Cities, recognizing the city of Grand Rapids as the nation's top data-driven city.
Good morning, Commissioners, Madam President. It is my distinct honor to recognize our staff for outstanding work. Our staff does outstanding work every day, and on occasion we get to share those accomplishments at commission meeting, particularly when we were recognized by entities outside of our organization. And last month I had the privilege to attending the Living Cities and Governing Magazine's conference, in which we were recognized as one of the top data-driven cities along with other communities. In this category, we outperformed cities such as San Diego, Louisville, Riverside, Chicago in the data-driven category. And one of the reasons that they identified us is because we have begun using data, particularly during our strategic plan, to identify key outcomes, analytics, and proactively support better outcomes. Some of the things that preceded our recognition was the work that we accomplished through Bloomberg's Work Cities, and we were the first Michigan city to be named as a partner with What Works. We were also launched our open data portal and pushed out a lot of data to help look at the performance of the organization, particularly through the equity lens, as well as our partnership with connected to GR Data with the National League of Cities, NYU's City Health and Social Determinants, Invest Health, GVSU, Kent County, and citizen-led data groups. So it's my privilege to recognize the organization, but particularly those employees that were instrumental in making this happen, and I want to thank our Customer Service and Innovation Officer, Becky Jo Glover, for her leadership, as well as the team of employees that participate in these projects, to include Luke Canfield, Eric DeLong, Alan Goniak, John Globinski, AJ Hills, Alex Melton, Sean Moeller, Josh Nieramore, John Overman, Shara Ponsel, Phil Shasma, Bob Swain, and Zach Teal. Please join me in recognizing these employees for their outstanding work.
Commission, Mr. Manager, everyone else out there in the community, we are so fortunate to be working with you, and we look forward to continuing on this data journey. We're excited primarily about the strategic plan and what we're going to be doing with our data in there. So thank you so much, Mr. Manager, for your constant support and the future ahead of us. Thank you, sir.
Now, I wear this with pride, and I'm looking now to ACM Matthews. We want to repeat our championship next year. Two-peat. All right, thank you.
Well, that was a great celebration. And I really want to, again, thank staff. Becky Jo, since your arrival, you've made quite a dent. We're so pleased about all the data that we get around customer service, especially because that really helps us track what we're doing and creates a certain level of accountability, and that really is a great service to our citizens, our residents. So thank you. Okay, Next, we have a resolution authorizing the publication of and scheduling a public hearing to consider an ordinance on crime prevention by environmental design, or CPTED. Commissioners, I would just want to remind you that we're thinking this might take about 10 minutes. Please hold your questions or jot them down so that we've got so many presentations today. We're going to want to make that, I think, the rule of thumb today, that hold your questions, please ask at the end. We want to get through this. Okay. Moved. Do we have a second? It's a resolution. Okay. All right. So, all those in favor? Oh, no, wait, we've got now the presentation. I'm all confused. This is a great first start. Yeah.
Good work, Suzanne, if you got that
Yes,
to
all
happen.
right, I'm going to blame this on Commissioner Jones.
I love it.
All right. Okay, Suzanne, take it away.
Good morning. It is with great pleasure that I bring this to you. This has been a work in progress since actually 2 years ago tomorrow. This item, similar item, was in front of you about alcohol. And it was brought about because there were some changes in state law regarding SDM licenses, sale of beer and wine in gas stations, and removal of the half-mile rule by the LCC. Dealing with liquor store separation distances. And so we came to the commission and after a number of meetings decided that that wasn't the direction to take. And so there was a unanimous decision by the commission to explore a CPTED ordinance. And so today I'm presenting that ordinance to you. What's interesting as we've gotten into this work that this proposed ordinance is unique. There are no known examples in the country where an ordinance is dedicated to CPTED for the purposes of addressing uses related to tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and illicit massage businesses. So what we did is when we went through and started talking about CPTED, we did a whole research. We also contacted experts to talk about what should be in the regulations, and we evaluated our city codes in cooperation with the police department, code compliance, and the attorney's office. This action resulted, this ordinance resulted from that work. CPTED is really a design philosophy. It's a multidisciplinary approach about the built environment. It's intended to deter criminal behavior and foster quality of life through the use of passive strategies incorporated into the normal planning and design and management of storefronts. And they're really subtle cues to encourage different behaviors. So if you think of eyes on the street or people be seeing and being seen, that's really just these natural passive ways to encourage different behaviors. It's really pretty simple. But there's certain cues that we want to have. So they have really 4 major categories in CPTED. One is natural access management. How do we guide people? So where is the front door, for example? Natural surveillance. How do we maximize visibility? Territorial reinforcement, the definition between public and private space. And then physical maintenance and upkeep. The experience that we've had, CPTED is not new to Grand Rapids. We've been doing this for almost 20 years. One of my first trainings, actually, when I first came to the city was in CPTED. And the police department has been leading that over the years. Our neighborhood associations are trained in it for crime prevention. We have used it in looking at different methods when we approve liquor stores, for example, or marijuana businesses. We have them go through a CPTED review today. So we've been using that in different ways, but it's all been kind of scattered in different places. And what we heard in the feedback from the alcohol discussions was that we need to think of a different approach, that really focusing on enforcement and potential problem properties should be the first priority. And how do we address that rather than creating other rules for people who are law-abiding or businesses that are law-abiding? And that we don't need to have all those additional regulations if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but where we have issues, that's where we should be focusing in on. So we heard that feedback from the Chamber of Commerce. We heard from the neighborhood associations during those public hearings for alcohol that they were worried about quality of life issues. How do we be proactive? Currently, when we have commercial properties, it's complaint-based. So unless someone is calling the Code Compliance Division, we're not out there proactively doing enforcement and identifying these problems. And so they continue to occur and recur. And in a lot of neighborhoods, people just don't call with those complaints. And those are the neighborhoods that are traditionally most affected by these non-compliance issues. We also wanted to make sure it was business friendly. And so when we're talking about the development center, we're trying to do that with the business community, but also with these rules that we currently have. They're placed in the building maintenance code, the zoning code, the nuisance code. They're in different places and they're enforced by different divisions in the city. So for a property owner, it can be confusing about which department to go to, which ordinance to follow. And so we want to try to make that as clear and comprehensive for them as possible, all in one place with one point of contact, and then one source for messaging. We also wanted to look at, since we do have different departments doing this work, how can we lean that and make it into one position, which is a SEPTED specialist position, so that they're focused on just that work. And in fact, in the planning department, we've reorganized the work that we did with our sign inspector, so that sign permitting is now being done by a planner. The SEPTED work will be done by the former sign inspector position, which is now our SEPTED specialist, in addition to sign enforcement. We also are trying to reduce calls for service by the police department, and I'll provide an example to you where we found there was a recent storefront that was redone on stalking, and we looked at the crime data 11 months before and 11 months after the facade changes were made, and we saw calls for service reduced by 20%. So just a simple change in the facade and how they're managing the property made that much of a difference. And so focusing on those outcomes, there's really three major categories in the ordinance that we focus on for all businesses: visibility, lighting, and property maintenance. Not super complicated. We tried to make them very clear and simple to follow. We also provided two different timelines for compliance in this. The first is the immediate actions, the simple fixes, such as taking down signs. But then also longer-term investments like parking lot lighting and other things that might take a business more time to comply with. We provide a bigger window for compliance so that we can continue to work with them and explore our funding opportunities to help them achieve that goal. Here's the storefront comparison that I mentioned for stocking, the before and after. And we not only have the quantitative data, but the qualitative data from the community officer who works in this area. He reports that the input that he's received from the neighborhood is that they feel it's more safe. So we have both the perception and the reality of safety that occurs when we start to see some of these improvements. So the proposed approach with this ordinance is that we have, as I mentioned, we try to combine everything into one ordinance. Partly one of the issues that we've historically had is that in the zoning ordinance you have non-conforming rights. And so if we had a visibility requirement in the zoning ordinance, which was adopted in 2007, some of the party stores have been around for decades. So if they've always had their windows blocked and they've always had that, we can't have them change, but under a police power ordinance and looking at how do we do this for public safety, we do have that opportunity to be more intentional in how we work with those businesses. I mentioned the reconfiguration of staff. Two other key pieces of this is an education and awareness campaign, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we really want to lead with that before we do enforcement, that is the primary goal, is what is the messaging, what's the tools that we want to give the businesses so that they understand why these rules are important and what the benefit is to the community. And then also working with the SIDS, philanthropy, and others, and the business owners themselves to identify opportunities for facade improvements so that they have the resources to be able to make those improvements. And for others who are investing in those storefronts, they have some guarantees that what's being done will stay. That won't be reverted back for some reason because we'll have proactive enforcement behind it. This affects very specific businesses, so state licensed facilities that sell alcohol and marijuana, those that sell tobacco, massage businesses, and businesses that are open after midnight, excluding restaurants that meet our administrative criteria that we have. So that nothing good happens after midnight kind of thing. Sometimes we have those issues for assembly uses, so it does give us a chance to be involved with that, but primarily we're talking about tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and and massage businesses where you might have illicit activities. The general requirements are focused on natural surveillance and property maintenance. And then we also have measures when we have chronic problem properties where we have repeated citations that additional measures would be needed. But those additional measures only come in when there becomes a repeat history of problems at that site. For engagement in the development of this ordinance, we had the public testimony that we took about the alcohol from the Planning Commission. We received the feedback from the chamber. We had the interdepartmental team that I mentioned. We took the general concepts to the SID boards in November and December, presented to the Public Safety Committee in February, had 2 additional community information meetings where nearly every neighborhood was represented in April, and then today we're asking that you set a public hearing for August 13th, hoping for adoption on August 27th. As a result of this work and feedback from the commission, there was also a suggestion we reach out to this illicit massage industry work group, Rachel Verweis and Melissa Weissman, who've been working on how to identify those businesses. And there are some kind of hallmarks of those businesses when you drive by once you know what they are. And so that is addressed in the ordinance to try to at least do some enforcement and some awareness and make it less attractive and less identifiable for persons who might be interested in that business. And those conversations also led to working with Erin at the Kent County Health Department. We recently received a sexual violence prevention grant that will help us with the education awareness campaign for SEPTED. So it's specific for that, which we're very excited about. And then finally, we also have had discussions with 2 professors at Bowling Green that specialize in SEPTED, and they're interested in helping us identify the qualitative and quantitative measures of success. And what's really neat about that is that we'll be able to do that and identify those markers before we begin the actual work as we're developing the education and awareness campaign, so that we'll know what difference it made in the program and what's happening in the community, city resources and how they're being expended as we have this mature over several years. And that is the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Suzanne.
Yep.
This is great. This is a good example of the messiness of democracy. We had so many difficult conversations about how to manage this issue, but this is a wonderful outcome. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments to make?
Thank you, Madam President. Suzanne, I have a couple questions. In light of this being like a citywide policy, how do you notice this best so that people will know that the public hearing is coming out? Do you go back to those same groups like the SIDS and the neighborhoods? And obviously, I think we believe people learn about what's happening in city government through our meetings, and that really isn't how they learn. So I'm just curious to know, how do you provide notice so that we can get as much feedback as possible from businesses as well as neighborhoods about this?
We can certainly, I think we were intending on reaching out to the business associations and the SIDS with just an email. And the neighborhood associations also are very interested in this. When we met with them, they were very supportive and really saw an opportunity here. And I think they would also be willing to share that information with their residents.
Okay, great, because I know they were really interested in the original conversation. Thank you for that. And then the
Commissioner
second.
Lear, may I also add, in addition to those direct contacts, we have a press release that we have prepared also to notice the community at large. So
Okay.
that should go out upon approval today.
Okay, great. And then the other question is, how do we avoid unintended consequences that, I know that we will eventually hear from people saying, I'm being targeted, or my business is being targeted, or they're only monitoring in this neighborhood. So how do you have a plan in place to make sure that there's equity in the way this policy is going to be administered?
We're currently in the process of developing a work plan for the SEPTED specialists to kind of lay out those protocols so that it's clear in how that education awareness campaign will work, as well as any enforcement. To me, the biggest thing in this work is explaining why. Mm-hmm. Because once people understand why and they see the results, I think it explains itself. But certainly we have business owners that may not understand. There may be language barriers. There's a lot of creative problem solving I think that we're going to have to do, predominantly on relationship building with those businesses, so that they understand that they're being treated the same as all other businesses of this type. And it may result in, why does the hair beauty supply place down the street not get the same attention that I'm getting? And that will probably fall under more sign enforcement, and the benefit of having the SEPTED specialists is they're also responsible for sign enforcement. So I think we'll be able to address some of those concerns in different ways depending on how they come up, but I think the protocols for staff will be very useful.
Great. And then my last comment is just thank you for including the information about the illicit massage parlors. I know, and thank you, Rachel, for being here as a support for that. We, in the human trafficking work group that I'm a part of, we've been kind of talking about that and getting updates from Rachel. So I'm really happy to see that embedded in that work being a part of this discussion.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. I think it's, the conversations have been super interesting and I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions or comments, colleagues? Then you know how eager I am to vote on this, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate that. We'll move on now. We have a Cure Violence Assessment Report presentation, and I think, Connie, you're going to tee that up, followed with some comments from Charlie Ransford and perhaps our new chief. Thanks.
Yes. At your July 9th meeting, you received the Cure Violence Assessment Report that was developed through a site visit, which occurred in last December. It was over a 4-day period. Representatives from Cure Violence toured our neighborhoods. They met with city officials, and they also met with community members who are interested in the Cure Violence program. They also hosted community meetings where it was provided an opportunity for the community at large to learn more about the Cure Violence model. So we have today Mr. Charlie Ransford, who joins us. He is the Director of Science at Cure Violence Global, and he'll provide an overview of the assessment and highlight recommendations that are contained in the report. And then afterward, Chief Payne has some information that he'll provide, and I'll follow up with next steps.
Thanks, Connie. First of all, I want to recognize Commissioner Kelly and Commissioner Jones for their support of this. They've really, I think, provided the leadership to bring it to where we're at right now. And then also I want to recognize Chief Payne, who I've been working with for 6 years on this, and he's been nothing but supportive and always shown to be deeply knowledgeable about this issue and about the approach. And then new to the team, Mark Washington and Eric DeLong, I think, have really been doing all they can to support this work and see it through. So I appreciate all that support, and I think we as a city will really benefit from it. The other thing I really want to highlight here is, just bring up is, it's clear that we in Grand Rapids don't have the problem Chicago has, or St. Louis, or Detroit, but there are some communities that are deeply affected, and some schools and some business districts that are really held back because of this problem. And if that's not enough to draw our concern and to draw our attention, certainly around July 4th, the incidents that happened downtown and the incidents that happened in other places certainly are bringing our attention to the fact that this can really affect the future of our city. So I think really being proactive and doing something right now about this, even though we don't have the serious problem other cities have, is really a way to move the city forward. So I'll go through my assessment real quick, and then I'll open it up for questions. So Cure Violence looks at the problem of violence as an epidemic. You've heard violence referred to as an epidemic, but actually the scientific evidence shows that it's a contagious problem that spreads like an epidemic. I'm happy to go into more detail about that and to give people the science and the studies that show this. But essentially what we at Cure Violence do is say, well, what if we treated violence like the epidemic that we see that it is? And so we apply the same approach that you would use for violence that we use for AIDS, or cholera, or Ebola. We use that same approach for violence. There are 3 basic elements to this. First, you interrupt the transmission. What this is basically saying is that violence starts as minor conflicts. It might be somebody did something to you before that you want to retaliate for, or somebody did something to a friend of yours, or there's a minor disrespect, and these start to escalate. And so we can detect these ahead of time, send somebody in, and diffuse it so that it doesn't become violence, and therefore it doesn't cause more retaliations and cause more people to be traumatized. Second, we identify the people in the community who are most likely to be violent. It's important to recognize that people in the community already know who these people are. The teachers know, the local police officers know, the community leaders know, people in the community know. And so using this information to go and meet people where they're at and deal with issues that they're dealing with so that we can change their behavior is a really effective way at reducing violence. And then lastly, norm change. A lot of what's driving violence is peer pressure. It's the norms of a community. It's not that a person is wanting to be violent. It's that they feel the pressure of having to respond to disrespect, or respond to a previous act of violence by retaliating. And so this peer pressure can be diffused. We can come in here, our workers can come in and take away this power of peer pressure and actually reverse it so that the peer pressure is encouraging people not to act violently. And critically, all of this work is done with the credible messengers, the right staff with the right skills. And so we're hiring people from the community. We're hiring people with similar backgrounds. You don't change people's behavior by coming in from the outside and trying to talk people out of doing something. You change it by coming in from the inside. And people from the same community, who the people that we're working with, they recognize as somebody they know, or at least recognize as having come from the same background as them. And so they're willing to listen, and they're willing to be influenced by the people that are on our staff. And the evidence for this program is abundant. These are just 3 of the many studies. There's more than a dozen studies showing the effectiveness of this program across different types of environments. You can see large reductions here. These are not for the whole city. These are for specific community areas within the city. But we see large and we see consistent reductions. And it's also important that this happens right away. Within the first couple of months, we see these reductions, and it's sustained throughout the life of the program. The program's been replicated around the world in many different places. It's in more than 20 cities in the US. And beyond reductions in violence, there's a lot of other positive effects. There's improvements in family relations. There's improvements in education attainment and jobs. There's improvement in parenting. And critically, the police-community relations. There's actually evidence that documents that our program has increased people's trust in the police. And there are reasons for this I'd be happy to get into, but there are a lot of positive effects of this program. But for me, most critically is what it does is it really changes our view of the people in the communities, the people that are involved in violence. And so we have a new lens. We don't see people as threats. We don't see people as people that we need to live in fear of, or we don't see them as thugs. What we see is we see people that have an untreated health problem, that they are showing us that they have this problem. They're showing the symptoms. And when we understand them as having a health problem, our approach to people is different. Our understanding of people is different. And therefore, instead of seeing them as threats, we see them as people in need of help and in need of care. And that is what we at Cure Violence can provide. So our assessment had 4 basic goals. Really, the real key is to identify the assets and barriers to implementation. And that allows us to jump into Grand Rapids and know what we have to do right away so we can get this implemented as soon as possible. But we also review the data to identify target areas, and we start to identify possible program designs, and then critically identifying next steps. And so this is what we did in our assessment, and this is what we'll be talking about. There's basically 7 questions, which I'll be going over one by one. I'll be going over the ones that are highlighted in white here. The grayed out ones are ones that I feel are not really issues that we need to deal with. And so there's, as you can see, 7, but instead of having you needing to read through these slides, I'll just go through them one by one. So first of all, we wanted to identify a lead agency. Now, we're not able to necessarily identify or narrow down the ones that we wanted to implement this program, to be overseeing it, because we weren't able to necessarily meet with these particular lead agencies. But through conversations, we have identified a short list of ones that we think could do this work. And during the next stages of the process, we'll be meeting one-on-one with these organizations to see about their willingness, their capacity, and things like this. Data, we did meet with the Chicago Police Department. They were very helpful, very willing to work with us. I think it's clear from Chief Payne and our previous relationship that they'll be a great partner with us on this. But there are some issues that we identified. We're not able to get the data broken down in the ways that we would really like to. But, I think previous conversations I've had recently have indicated that we could probably overcome these barriers, and this is something that we can definitely address in the next steps. But just to show you some of the data that we did get from the police department, we could see the level of homicides. And I think it's important to understand, first of all, we know the population of Grand Rapids to be, just short of 200,000. And so you could quickly do that. These rates of homicides are in the neighborhood of 4 to 5, which working in a lot of different cities, that's a low homicide rate. But it's really concentrated in certain communities. We could also see that over time that right now we're not at a place where Grand Rapids is at its highest. That really happened, I think, 10 or 20 years ago. But what we've seen recently is we've seen a spike. I think right now, I recently heard that we're at 9 homicides. And so 9 homicides would definitely start to put us up into one of those spikes. And so I think it's really critical, although we don't need to get carried away with thinking that we're heading down the road of St. Louis or Chicago. I think it's really critical to notice that we are spiking as epidemics spike sometimes. And so we really have an opportunity to put in place an epidemic control strategy that could prevent this spiking, keep us down at the very low level of violence that Grand Rapids has been used to the last few years. Number 5, implementing agency for the work. We weren't able to meet one-on-one with potential implementing agencies or in a small group with implementing agencies to really talk about this work and to determine whether there's capacities. But we did hear about ones, and we did talk to some people from ones that I think have a lot of potential. In particular, I think Realism is Loyalty and the Urban League, I think, really stand out in terms of their willingness and their understanding of this work. But there's certainly many other places I think could implement this. And I think in the next stages of the process, we'll look more deeply at this. But for instance, Realism is Loyalty is an organization that has attended a couple Cure Violence conferences and really knows the work deeply. So I think once we get into the process and do a call for proposals, there's a lot of reason to believe that there will be an organization that can step up for this. Number 6, staff. We have not necessarily identified specific staff, but we did have an opportunity to meet a lot of people, including people that work for specific community-based organizations. And I think there's undoubtedly the potential that there are staff here, and I do not have any concerns about this. But at this point in time, we haven't identified a list of potential staff, and that's something that we'll do at the next stages. And then support services, I think typically at this point we like to have at least a set list of the support services that we will be engaging with. I think we have a limited list of that, and so I think there's more work to be done there. And so I think the next steps that will be part of the process is really making that list of support services, developing those relationships, and then making sure that they know what their role in this process is. So looking at the target area, here's a heat map that was provided by the Grand Rapids Police Department. And we could see that there are some typical places I think we all are probably familiar with. There's the Franklin and Eastern area. There's the Burton and Division area. And so, we don't necessarily know exactly where we would carve out our box, but an important thing to keep in mind is our service areas, they need to be a small enough population size so that our workers can deal with that number of people. But they also need to be a limited geographic size so that they can get around the area. So I'm confident that we can create a box here that will address these major hotspots. And I think because of Grand Rapids' small size, it's also possible maybe to have areas outside of our target area. But this is the exact area that we'll be drawing it around is something that will be done in the next steps of the process. Populations that we usually deal with in our target areas are usually around, I'd say around 20 to 30, 40,000. They sometimes can get up to even 80 to 100,000. So when we see the South Service area being about 40,000 people, that's a manageable population. Now we just need to start thinking about geography. What can our workers actually drive and get around in? But I have no doubt that we'll be able to draw a box that will really deal with, I think, a substantial amount of the violence. So our recommendations that we put forward, first of all, I think the first option being a pilot in one target area, which would consist of a team of 7. This is the typical cure violence replication that we do when we go to places like Durham, when we go to places like Jacksonville. These are the teams that we start off with. And so this is what our highest recommendation is. This is when we talk about cure violence being evidence-based, it's based on having a program staff of this size. Option 2 would actually step this up a bit. It would take it from not only having a community-based program, but also having a partner program in the hospital. So that if somebody comes in with a blunt force trauma or a stabbing or a shooting, we're right there on the scene. We have workers within a couple hours reporting to the hospital and reporting back to the community, connecting all of the work together. This is really, I think, a much more aggressive program that could really deal with the violence. Then option 3, there is the option to have a more scaled back version of the program. For instance, in Camden, New Jersey, we have a program there that has, they've had between 4 and 5 workers. I think right now they have 5. So you can have a sort of smaller program. It's important to understand that this is not evidence-based work. A scaled-back program is not something that's been scientifically studied to show that there is an effectiveness for the program. But we can certainly do the trainings, and we can certainly do the work, and we'd be willing to work with Grand Rapids on that more scaled-back version. As I've talked in the community to a few people, a few prominent people in Grand Rapids have asked me, well, why don't you put together a $1 million program? And certainly I think we can put together much more aggressive programs like this. When we look at the cost of violence, $1 million isn't really very much at all. And with $1 million program, we could have a much greater staffing level in the neighborhood of 15 workers, or maybe even more workers than that. And so therefore we could really cover all areas of the city really effectively, and we'd be able to squash violence of all types in all different areas very effectively. So I'd certainly be willing to put together a much more aggressive proposal if that's something that the city wants to consider. Next steps for Cure Violence, if we do work with Grand Rapids, Cure Violence would then start our pre-implementation phase, and really the key part of this, first of all, is selecting this program structure that I was just talking about, and then identifying how Cure Violence Global will be working with Grand Rapids to provide the services that we provide, which is training and technical assistance and helping you set up the program. The program itself is ultimately owned by Grand Rapids. You will be the people who are implementing it and staffing it and hiring the workers. We're just there to help train you, help make sure that you do it right, and just provide whatever support services that you need. But most of the money for this program, when we talk about the cost of the program, 80% of that money goes to salaries for people that live in the community, people that oftentimes might currently be unemployed. And so we're providing really, most of the funding that we're talking about is really going right back to the community in terms of salaries for the workers that we're hiring. So that's all I have right now for the assessment, but I'm really looking forward to your questions, so please. I know, Chief Payne, would you like to say a few words first?
Yeah, we have additional slides, and then if you could pause, and then we can come back and answer all your questions.
Yes. If colleagues, there was an addition, you'll see some analytics that we'd like Connie to go over, I believe, or the chief to go over, and then we'll take all these questions. Thank you. Thanks, Charlie.
Madam President, Commissioners, Mr. Manager, thank you for having me here today. The first slide you'll see, well, I want to start out, Commissioner Kelly, years ago, as Charlie mentioned, we had met many times about Cure Violence, and even Commissioner Jones, but prior to him being on the commission. So it's something that has interested me for years as a measure to help prevent violent crime in our community. The first slide you'll see here, we actually expanded this out late. We were able to get our analysts to give us a little more updated version of the slide that Charlie has already presented. But gun-related violence from 2013 to July of 2019. And as you can see, there's been increases, and as Charlie mentioned, the spikes that we see. This has occurred historically throughout the years in the city of Grand Rapids. My goal, as I've mentioned, is to have zero violence in the community. I see Cure Violence as a way of doing it. I'll point out, you look at 2018, our homicides, the first month of 2018, we had 6 homicides. We ended the year with 8. Again, none of those are acceptable. We constantly try to work to prevent that. But that just points out that we do occasionally have spikes. And a program like Cure Violence could hopefully come in and offset some of those spikes that we see throughout history with our incidents of violence. The second slide is actually from this year and is similar to the heat map, but it breaks down the area, the time, date, and what the actual incidents are where violence gun-related violence is occurring. It's temporal and spatial analysis from one of January of 19 to July of 2019. So that just gives the example of where we're seeing is very similar to the information that Charlie provided. And as he stated, I have been in support of cure violence in the past, and I'm supportive of any measure that will reduce the level of violence in the community. I have historically reached out to people when we've had incidents, talked to them in a very informal way of when incidents occurred, say, hey, what's going on? What can you do? This will, cure violence is actually a more formal way of doing that, where it can be tracked and we can help hopefully get ahead of any violence that's occurring.
Exactly.
Okay, so I will just go over quickly the internal process. So Charlie let you know the next steps for if the city were intended to move forward. Internally, we would be looking at developing a staff response for you related to the assessment report. And that would be an interdepartmental team, which would include the Parks Department, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Community Development, the Executive Office, and the Police Department, making sure that we have sort of all facets of our departments that do work in the community and touch in these areas. We would meet with potential project partners that may include the Kent County Health Department, universities, and nonprofits within our community to gauge their interest and how they might move forward in terms of partnerships. And then hopefully we would have an opportunity and likely need your support in terms of how do we identify potential funding partners. We will come back to you at least with the staff response to the analysis report, assessment report, and provide an update to you on August 27th, and also would address the Public Safety Committee as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Charlie, you had something to add?
Yeah, can I just add one more thing? I just want to also thank Asante Kane, who has been, I think, for the assessment process, he's been the person who's been leading, and he's been very helpful, and I think I can honestly say he's done everything he can to be helpful.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Asante. Asante? Okay. We've got to fix that. So, Asante, thank you so much. And colleagues, what questions do you have for Charlie or for Chief Payne?
I have 4, if you don't mind me asking. But
The left side here.
Okay. We missed you.
left side,
Cannot
strong
forget.
side.
All right. Commissioner Moody, I've got to remember, that's my side, too.
That's right, left side, strong side. I don't know what's going on over there. Something getting ready to happen over here. I like the presentation that you gave, and thank you for giving it. I've been doing some reading on cure violence for quite some time since I've been on this commission. But I do have 4 concerns. They're basically questions. I wrote them down as you were talking. One, you mentioned the word in your presentation, epidemic, and then you used the word disease. Before any disease gets out of control, there is a root or a starting point. Does Cure Violence understand the starting point and the cultural differences in a community where violence is out of control? That's 1. 2, how is Cure Violence going to deal with mental illness? Because you have the health department on your presentation. 3, what types of health problems will Cure Violence look at within the community? And then 4, what real role does the health department have with mental illness, with community violence, and with this epidemic?
Sure. So I'll take take them in order. In terms of understand the community and understand the root causes, as you probably noted, the people that we hire for this job are from the community, and they have a similar background to people that have these problems. And so a lot of times they used to have problems with violence and violent behavior. And so we rely on these staff to understand the community and to understand what is needed. I certainly don't I can't come into a community I don't reside in and claim that I understand it. The way that you do that is by working it from the inside. And so we will make sure that we hire the people that understand the problem and understand the root causes and understanding what the people that we're serving are actually dealing with. But typically this happens with all the communities that we work in. And so we typically see a lot of the same things. And a lot of what happens, with violence itself, a lot of what's happening is really about trauma, and it's about being traumatically exposed to violence in your life, and it's about peer pressure. And if you can deal with those two things, you can cut down a lot of the violence. Now, you still have a lot of other issues that people are dealing with, jobs, education, drugs, family issues. Our workers deal with all of these. And it might surprise you, but actually when you're dealing with any kind of epidemic disease, you deal with all of these. If you're dealing with tuberculosis in an immigrant population in a city, you're going to be talking about things like jobs and education and all these things. This is very common with this kind of public health work, that you deal with these other issues. But when it comes down to root causes, what is causing people to be violent, there's a lot of people without a job. Not all of them are being violent. What separates the people that are being violent is that they themselves have been traumatized, that they are dealing with trauma, and they're also dealing with peer pressure that's encouraging this violence. And that's what's really separating things, and that is what we're really effective at dealing with. But all the other things we deal with too. We have I can give you the statistics, it's been studied. We have a very great track record at not just placing people in jobs, but placing in jobs that they keep, being there with them to make sure that they have what they need. And the people that we're placing in jobs are people with felony records, people with records that have a difficult time getting jobs, and so they do need this help. And so that, we absolutely can deal with a lot of the issues that are affecting communities. Second, you talk about mental illness. I think it's really important to recognize that, I think when the mental illness that we typically think of when we say mental illness, that's not driving violence. People that are mentally ill are not the ones that are driving violence. It's people that are traumatized. It's people that have exposure to violence. It's people that are growing up in violent communities. And although that is affecting a person's mental health, I wouldn't consider that person mentally ill. I'd consider that person traumatized. And it's a very treatable problem. It's something that, there are ways in which that we ourselves provide treatment, our workers provide treatment by encouraging things like mindfulness training and things like this to help people deal with trauma. But it's also connecting with services in the community, because there are a lot of great service organizations here that I think we could draw on. So yeah, we'll absolutely deal with the trauma and that sort of thing. But when you're talking about mental illness more generally, that's not really something we get into. We get into only the stuff that drives violence. And when you talk about other health problems, again, we're interested in only working with people that are violent. The people that are most likely to be violent are the ones we deal with. So to the extent that population has other health problems, and they do sometimes, we'll be dealing with those. If a person maybe they do have maybe they have a depression issue, we'll help them deal with that. Maybe they have an injury, we'll help them deal with that. One of the things that we found in the cities that we work in is that our workers are actually really good at helping our clients get follow-up care. And so a lot of times what we see with people that are involved in violence is, they might go into the hospital for the gunshot wound. They got to come back the next week to get follow-up care, or the next month, or the next 3 months for follow-up care. A lot of times they'll skip it. They just won't do it. Our workers working with them will help them get that care. And so, yeah, we're absolutely helping this small group of people, the most likely to be violent. We're helping them with all sorts of issues.
Excuse me 1 second in that.
Yeah.
I just want to make a point. On the healthcare issue, there are some individuals who are addicted to different types of drugs, which would cause them to become violent.
Yeah.
And so my concern there, too, is how does Cure Violence help in that arena?
Not to pick on semantics here, but I wouldn't say that the drugs cause them to be violent. What I would say is it reduces their ability to resist violence.
Sure.
So it affects their susceptibility to violence. And so you're absolutely right, it's something we have to deal with. And so we ourselves will not be dealing with their drug problem, because we are not licensed to do that. We don't train people to do that. But we will make sure that we're connected to the right social services in the community to make sure. And so what would happen then in terms of the specific people is, it's not just us saying, oh, there's this organization over here, you have a drug problem, you need to get help, here's your referral. What we'd be doing is we'd be driving that person to the social service. We'd be walking them in the door. We'd be asking them the next week, hi, how's it going? Are you doing this still? The next month, are you still on this? Are you still doing it? So, I mean, people that are very high risk, a lot of times they need this sort of really close contact to make sure that they continue on with the care programs that they need. And so that's the sort of things that we could provide for this small group of people that really need it. Lastly, you asked about the role of the health department. That's really up to the city, and that's really up to the health department. What I would say is we'd like to have a really engaged health department. Some cities, the health department is leading. They're the lead agency. That is actually usually where the health department is within the city, and so that makes it a lot easier. Here with having it be at the county, it might be a bit more difficult because you have different entities, but then, you know, there's also a lot of places that do not engage the health department, that only do it through the mayor's office or maybe through a large nonprofit. That's an option too. What I would say is I've encountered a lot of people at the health department who are wanting to work on this issue and are willing to work on this issue and are deeply knowledgeable about it. And so I would, you know, I think as our next steps, I would really look to more engage the health department. You know, for the last 6 years, the health department has been sending people to various meetings that we've had to be supportive and to maybe be involved in this. And then finally, what I'd say is in Lansing right now is starting their assessment process. I'm not sure if anybody knows, but we've been in contact with Lansing. They're starting their contracting process. And it's the health department, it's the county health department that's doing it. And so I think, you know, even in Michigan, there's sort of this record of the health department doing it and the health department interest in driving this issue. So we'd look to you to determine what the role of the health department is, and we'd work with you to try to make that happen.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lanier.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlie, for the presentation, and to Connie as well as the chief. I just have a few questions. On your slide, I think 23, it kind of lists the 3 options, and I'm curious about the dollar amount associated with each of those options. So if you can kind of run through those quickly. I know you talked about the more aggressive $1 million option that wasn't listed. So I'm curious to know what the other 3 are. And then under option 2, under option 1, it talks about the size of the team being 7, but under option 2, I don't see that. So I'm just curious to know what the size of the team would be for that one. And then if, for option 3, if there's a list of à la carte options, you know, so that, and the price for those, just curious to know if that exists. And so those are all kind of tied to one slide. And then my other question is, how does Cure Violence address this anti or snitching culture of their workers? So, you know, how do you reconcile, you know, that snitching thing as they're trying to do their work effectively?
Okay. So great questions. So in terms of cost, option 1, 7 staff members, the cost, first of all, it's really driven by what kind of salary you want to pay your workers. What we typically see is that workers, outreach workers and violence interrupters are paid a salary of around $30,000, $35,000 a year plus benefits. And then the supervisors would be paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 plus benefits. That's typical. I would love to encourage you to go above that, frankly. You know, I think the work that they do deserves that. But you know, as you can see, because of most of the costs are going to be driven by the salaries, that drives the overall cost a lot. What we see in terms of hiring 7 people, and then of course there's a training and technical assistance cost associated with Cure Violence. That training and technical assistance cost tends to be around $70,000. Could get up, it could be higher or lower depending on what our relationship and contract is with you. Overall cost for option number 1 tends to be in the neighborhood of $750,000 a year, and we like to see a 3-year commitment at least. The option number 2, So yeah, as you noted, I didn't put staffing levels on there. So there's a couple options to option 2. You can have it being done with the 7 staff members, the $700,000 approach, and just assign a couple of them to the hospital. There's also the option if the hospital's doing it, can the hospital pay for it? Maybe they pay for those 2 workers, and so you're down to 5. Or maybe you have your 7 workers, and the hospital's paying for 2 additional. So it's hard for me to put a price tag on this. I would put it at, I'd put a range on it of, anywhere from 500,000 up to, if you're adding a couple workers, it would be, maybe 800, 850,000. So, there's a range there depending on the staffing levels. And then the last one, the scaled back of it, obviously, what kind of trainings are you looking for? How many staff are you going to hire? I think what I was challenged to do was, what can we do for around $350,000 or so? And so that's what I was looking at is, can there be an option in that price range? And I think there is something that we could do. Again, it wouldn't be evidence-based. Again, that would limit where we could respond to considerably, but there is an option that I think we can get the cost down in more in that neighborhood. In terms of the training options, I'll have to get back to you on exactly what those are and the cost of those. We have done it before with other cities. There are, I think, we would have to have a conversation because there are some concerns about exactly how things are done, just to make sure that the main concern is hiring practices, making sure you're doing background checks, making sure that you're providing support for workers. These are the kind of the key things to make sure that the program doesn't fail. And so yeah, we would be able to do this sort of training option with you, but we want to make sure that we have an agreement in place that makes sure those things happen. In terms of the snitching culture, so the way that the work has to happen is that our workers are not reporting to police. So, and that has to be understood by the police department. It has to be understood by the city. It has to be understood by the community. And the reason for this is because, 1, that's the only way our workers can be effective, and 2, that's the only way our workers can be safe. And so if our workers are out there and people think, they even suspect that they're turning people in, they're going to be targeted. Or people aren't going to even talk to them. And so just as policy, our workers cannot be expected to be snitching or reporting people to police. And the thing I would say furthermore is that our workers typically don't have anything that the police don't have. Our workers aren't getting information. They're not seeking information about who's shot who. They're interested in the groups involved, and the friend groups involved, and they're picking up information about what happened from the streets, which the police are also doing. And so, it's not as if we're holding back things from the police that could make them more effective. That's just not the case that we find in the cities that we're working in. What we're doing is just finding out the groups involved, something that I think everybody in the community knows. And so, as long as we're kept independent from the police department, our workers then can go in and really be trusted and be influential and be safe. And so that's the way the work works. I'd be happy to address this more if you have more questions, because it's an important issue. It's an issue that honestly we get at every single city that we work in. And so, I think the cities that we end up being most successful in are the ones that I think understand this and that the police department really supports and buys into that. And I know Chief Payne has expressed to me his understanding of that, and so I'm confident that we'll get there with Grand Rapids.
Okay, well, thank you, Charlie. As we know, we have next steps outlined by Connie. Thank you. So this is going to be referred to staff, and will come back to us at a later date. Commissioner Jones?
Just one quick question
Okay.
For Charlie, and that is, I know that you talked about the evidence in other cities where you saw a marked difference with regards to the improved relationships with police and community. That's one thing that stuck out to me with the data that you had shared previously. Also, can you speak to at all whether or not you've seen any evidence around the efforts of Cure Violence in with regards to trying to reduce the amount of illegal guns in the community? Has that been at all a point of a focus for the research?
Yeah, happy to address this. So first of all, with police relations. So the evidence I talk about comes from our study, not our study, but the study done on our program in New York City. It was a survey done by John Jay College of Criminal Justice, completely independent from us. I actually didn't even know that they were doing this part of the study. I knew they were doing other parts of the study. But I mean, what they did is they did surveys, not just in our areas, but also in other areas that didn't have cure violence. And they looked at the change in your willingness to call police and in your trust in police, and your trust in police to resolve issues. And what they found is that cure violence places improved much more than other areas that didn't have cure violence. They put a percentage on it, but it's a survey, so I don't know how much that means. But there was a 10% improvement, whatever that specifically means. But I think rationally, the way I've talked to the researchers and the way that we're kind of thinking about this, although more study needs to happen, is the cure violence people are there to deal with some of the really serious stuff. They're there to diffuse situations. There's a lot of times where police will, they'll see one of our workers and like, hey, can you help out what's going on in this corner right now? Can you diffuse it? And we'll help to diffuse it. So what we're doing is we're stepping into situations that usually require police to use, tactics that the community might not like. Putting people in handcuffs, arresting people, doing things more aggressively. We can go in there and do things, in a way that's much more approachable, much more acceptable. And so the police no longer have to be put in those positions. So I think we can do that same sort of thing here. For instance, what happened on 4th of July, we could potentially have workers in the crowd and things start to heat up, they could be diffusing it. They could be interrupting it. And so instead of relying on police to separate people, instead of relying on police to try to threaten people, you can have people in the crowd who are influential, who are really, trying to diffuse things. And then you asked about the illegal guns. I mean, this is, we've never really been part of doing anything. So when you talk about illegal guns, you're either talking about having people turn them in, or you're talking about having people prosecuted for something. And so those are two things that we've just never really been involved in. But what we can do, and what we do is we discourage people from carrying guns. We in other words, we affect the demand for guns. And so the more we're affecting people that are the most high risk for wanting to use guns, that's affecting the demand. And so, I mean, there's never been a study to show effect on illegal gun trade or the amount of guns or anything like that. But to the extent that we might affect it, that's how we would do it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your coming today. We've got a pretty packed agenda. And I'm sure, Charlie, you'd be available for further questions if somebody had shot you an email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you too, Connie. So now we have a presentation, a safety update on potential ordinance changes related to replica weapons, and this is going to be presented by our city attorney. Again, let's hold the questions until she's done, and then we'll keep on moving. Get out of here at some point. I was told.
Okay, quick training session. Good morning, Commission, City Manager. First, let me quick acknowledge two people. Looks like, oh, there he is back there. Kristen Wewa, who's our legal advisor, for assisting me, and Chief Payne for his input, because anytime that you make a change to the law, there has to be an update and a training that takes place within the police department. And you asked that we would look at the possibility of having a replica gun ordinance. And so what we've done is we've looked into that. And so I got to explain the little change in language, because what we've looked at as far as replica gun, I think what encompasses that is under state and federal law, the terms are imitation firearms, and then pneumatic weapons, which covers like the BB guns and the paintball guns, which at one time until 2015 were considered firearms, but the state law changed and now they're considered pneumatic weapons. And so what we've done is to make our language consistent with state and federal law. So what is the state today? The current state is there's 106 imitation and pneumatic guns that have been taken in or confiscated by the Grand Rapids Police Department since January 1st of 2018. And we have no ordinance regulating replica/imitation firearms or pneumatic weapons. Our goal is to change that. So officers have drawn their weapons or firearms on individuals who possess non-firearm weapons due to a challenge of differentiating between real firearms and imitation firearms or pneumatic weapons. So our goal is to update our firearm ordinance to meet the city's current needs and enhance the importance of community safety. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by changing our current language in our ordinance and by expanding our ordinance to include the regulation of imitation firearms and pneumatic guns. So imitation firearm regulations. So that's under federal law. So we look at federal law and see what we could do within the constraints of that, keeping in mind that it's limited what we can do based on state and federal law. So when we look at that, federal law requires that there's distinct markings on imitation guns or look-alike guns. So in this case, it would be either an orange tip or an orange cap, translucent or transparent or brightly colored body, so that police officers can, or anyone else can tell that these are imitation firearms and not real firearms. If you look at that picture, the picture that was earlier, we don't have to go back to that, but it's hard sometimes for them to distinguish, are these real guns or imitation guns? And so what we would require is that we regulate the sale, possession, and giving away of imitation firearms that do not comply with federal law, and that means having the markings. We'll prohibit brandishing of imitation firearms. What that means that you can't point those guns or have them in such a way that someone feels threatened by them. We'll prohibit altering the imitation firearms, meaning that if they're required to have the markings, if they don't have the markings, it's a violation of the ordinance. Pneumatic gun regulation. We'll regulate the discharge of pneumatic guns in public and some private places, and the law allows us to do that. We'll prohibit youth under 16 from possessing a pneumatic gun in a public place without the supervision of a parent. Will prohibit youth under 16 from possessing a pneumatic gun on private property without the permission of a parent and the property owner. And what this will do is increase accountability and safety. These changes in the ordinance embrace the concept of police and community working together for a safer community. It requires adult oversight of minors in possessions of weapons covered within this ordinance. It requires property owners to take reasonable steps to prevent irresponsible use of weapons on their property, for example, the pneumatic weapons. Our timeline for this is that on August 27, 2019, we'll come back and introduce an ordinance to you for discussion. In fall 2019, we hope to develop materials, training materials to educate the community on the new ordinance. We realize how important this is, how critical it is for people to understand the ordinance going forward. And so we'll have that for you as well. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions, colleagues? Commissioner Jones?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam City Attorney. I did want to, I know that we've been having conversations about this, and I'm pleased to hear that we are moving in the direction of trying to find a solution around this issue. And I want to take an opportunity. I've reached out to Chief Payne in the past and want to publicly recognize I think the phenomenal work that was done by the department, by the officers who were involved specifically with the incident back on the weekend of, I think it was July 10. It was where there was a replica gun that was taken off of the 13-year-old. And again, I was able to see the video footage and thought that the officers handled it very well and remained calm, I think in the midst of some very, very tense environment. And just again, want to recognize their work and have asked that the chief get the word back to them in terms of our appreciation. So.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Glad you brought that up. Thank you, Commissioner. Did you have a question as well? Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you, Madam City Attorney, for the presentation. So just so that I'm understanding, under the slide that says imitation firearm regulation, so any imitation firearm should have, if I'm understanding this correctly, should have an orange tip or cap or brightly colored body. And so if they do not, then you're saying that they shouldn't be sold? I mean, help me to understand that part.
Correct. They shouldn't be sold, they shouldn't be possessed, or they shouldn't be given away. Because if you sell them and they don't have them, it defeats what we're trying to say. This is an imitation gun, so everyone's aware of that.
So federally, this is a law that you're saying that we want to make sure that we have a part of the ordinance that you all will be working on. So then how do we get back to the manufacturer? And I guess that's probably the second bullet here, is to regulate the sale of that. So is that a conversation then with manufacturers of these guns, that they're outside of the law?
I would say we probably have to determine where the issue lies. So is there an
Okay.
alteration? Is the manufacturing companies not doing what they're supposed to do, which is a bigger issue, and I think would stay on the federal level. If it's the store has somehow, or the person has somehow altered the weapon and then
On them.
transferring that to someone else, then it becomes something that we can govern.
Absolutely. Okay, that makes sense. And then I think, as you all are putting a policy together, I'll just kind of ask the question, the same question that I asked about the SEPTED is, unintended consequences and certain populations feeling targeted. And I know that there has that potential. And so as you're creating an ordinance, it would be great to make sure that that thought process is in mind as we're talking about in chief, as you're putting together policy for training and how it will be, the action behind the policy. It would be great to make sure that we're keeping that in mind, that there wouldn't be an oversaturation of specific communities or targeting specific communities, because then you're going to see an overabundance of activity in one neighborhood than you would another if that thought process isn't taken into consideration.
Absolutely, and we have thought about that, and we'll work closely with the police chief to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Question.
Left side.
Left side. Left side.
Commissioner Moody.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney, for this report. But I just have one question, and I think it's very easy to answer. You used the word in your email, mechanism. It says, I'm assuming that mechanism means system. So there's a system already in place to dispose of the weapons, or you're putting a system together? Because you said providing a mechanism to dispose of weapons used in violence or in this ordinance. What systems are in place?
Right, that's one of the things that we're looking at, but for purposes of today, what we were asked to do is to come back to you with something on replica guns.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. I think that wraps that up. Thank you so much, City
Left side.
Attorney.
Left side.
Yeah? Oh, you have a comment. Okay, all right. I guess you have to stand up for me.
It's different being in the middle, isn't it?
Yeah.
I do want to express my appreciation for the law department as well as the police department. Just today, these three items related to crime prevention, the SEPTED, the replica weapon ordinance, as well as our cure violence report. Those were things that, if you recall, back in last December or so, when we were doing the debrief on 21st Century Police, we committed to do. And so this is the continuation of that work. All of this has been through Public Safety Committee, and so now it's time for us to determine what what this body wants to do moving forward. Regarding the replica weapon, Commissioner Jones rightly pointed out the amount of restraint that the officers use in their encounter recently. But if you recall last year, we could have been talking about a much more unfortunate incident because the young adult had brandished the weapon. Actually, I think it was pointed towards the officer, and the officer had to discharge because they thought that lethal force was being used. And so I take this very, very seriously because I know that there are people who feel like they have to carry something for whatever reason, but they're really endangering themselves and can potentially be endangering others. And so whatever we can do within our authority, this is not, and for those gun advocates, we are not trying to reduce gun rights. This is within the current federal law, state law, and all we're doing is making sure that we have the local enforcement to act upon that. Because I think in terms of accountability, there were some things that we probably could have done to hold those perpetrators more accountable and send a message to our community that this is not appropriate, and this proposed ordinance will give us the ability to do that.
Absolutely. Well put, and thank you again for your presentation. We certainly do not want to put our, often young people are doing this, at risk, or our police officers who have exercised amazing restraint. It's a reflection on great training. So thank you, and we can move on.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
We can move on.
Yeah, I know. We have a lot on our agenda. So next, we have a resolution authorizing Art Prize Project 1, which is a little bit of a transition from our normal Art Prize event. This is Art Prize Project 1 2019 to take place within designated boundaries in the city of Grand Rapids from September 7 to October 27. And I am pleased to invite Jory Bennett to give us an overview. So thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'm excited on behalf of our team to be here. I first want to start by saying Art Prize would not be the success that it is today without the deep collaboration and partnership of the city, the community at every level. And so we are excited to have that continue. And on behalf of our entire team, I want to share our excitement. We couldn't be more excited to continue our collaboration this year as we launch Project 1 on September 7th. So I'm going to give you a high-level overview, and then I'll have a couple of my colleagues present a couple of the details. So our mission as an organization, we continue to be a team that produces open, citywide contemporary art experiences that do all these wonderful things for the community, celebrating artists, encouraging conversation, and promoting cultural understanding. As you know, we announced last year that we'll be taking Art Prize to a biennial format. So Art Prize, as we note today, will take place in the even years moving forward. And we're launching a new format event called Project, first year Project 1 this fall. And really the advantage to doing this is that it enables us to, for Art Prize years, give our creatives, our artists, our venues, and our team more time and space to make Art Prize even better. And also hopefully make it even more precious to our visitors in the community. And then in the odd years and between Art Prizes, it allows us to experiment and have deeper collaborations with artists in the community. And our hope is that both formats of events will, moving forward, help inform each other, help make each better, and keep the fall really exciting for the city and for our visitors and for artists. So high level, what is Project 1? As you know, Art Prize, the Art Prize model is a competition. We're shifting that organizing principle to a commission model. So as you know, we award a large amount of prizes at the end of Art Prize. In project years, we're taking that money and we're front loading it and giving it out to commissions, to artists that we can work with on a deeper level to collaborate and place their work around the city in a way that's in tune with the community. So this year, for Project 1, we've commissioned 5 nationally and internationally renowned artists to help us do the exhibition. So each of those artists, some of them will be citing their work in multiple locations around the city. Some of them will have just one location. But the cool advantage of Project One this year is that, and future project years, is that we want to listen to the community and work with different parts of the city that are actually asking for art and more art activation in their communities, and potentially working with them directly and our artists to cite the work. So Katie will talk a little bit more specific to the site locations this year, but generally we're looking at citing the work downtown. There'll be 6 installations downtown, and then we're also working in MLK Park to cite 2 installations there, and then also at the Tanglefoot building on the west side, there will be 2 installations there. The exhibition will take place for 7 weeks. That's a longer period of time than Art Prize years, but we want to give the work time and space to be up and for people to come back multiple times and also come from out of state to see the work. And just like Art Prize, Project One will be underpinned really by all sorts of volunteer opportunities, which are already taking place now. A lot of educational programming. We'll be bringing students from all over the state, as well as working with Grand Rapids Public Schools here, specifically on engaging students through the exhibition. Our high-level objectives for Project One are very similar to what we seek to do in Art Prize years, but there's a couple differences. We really want to support contemporary artists doing grand-scale temporary work. So we want to work with artists in project years that can do pretty incredible outdoor large-scale installations, but potentially really can't do that work anywhere else except for Grand Rapids, because we have a city and a community that finds a way to yes. So we're excited for that. We want to generate a deeper, more diverse community involvement in project years, where we can actually come alongside artists and community members and generate collaborations and conversations around a theme. I'll talk about that theme in a moment, to spur more conversation and audience engagement. And last but not least, we want to continue to draw that national and international attention to the city. I won't spend too much time on this, but there's certainly intentional contrasts and then common pillars between how Art Prize and project years will work moving forward. But I did want to again hit on the intentional citing that we're working to do in project years. As you know, in Art Prize years, we have a geofenced boundary that we work within that really facilitates that voting in that game, which is great. But in project years, we want to be more intentional about potentially where we site the work around the city to really encourage a new urban art adventure experience for visitors and for our community members. So for Project One, our working title for the exhibition is called Cross Lines. And I mentioned that in project years, we're going to be setting a theme. We really want that theme to be something that our artists are responding to and that the community is able to have a conversation about. And so for this year, in listening to key stakeholders and community members for the last really year of planning, a theme has boiled up that we felt would really resonate with the community, but also is universally universally recognizable. So I'm going to read this. Grand Rapids has a rich legacy of public art defining and enhancing civic space, yet still faces difficult questions about access, equity, and boundaries. We have invited 5 world-renowned artists to consider how these lines, both visible and invisible, affect our sense of belonging. So this statement is something that our artists have helped us sort of dial in through their work. Our artists are already thinking a lot about this topic as it relates to their own work. And they've done several site visits into the city to listen to the community in which they're citing. And their work will spur this conversation in the community in hopefully a really a great way. In addition, our artists that are bringing their work to the city, certainly visually is pretty impressive, but all of our artists are working with the community and interacting and actually asking the community to get involved with their work in a way that's really pretty phenomenal. So we're asking artists to really temporarily alter public spaces and maybe create new ones, but also explore how and who for the city is made and engaging the community in that. I mentioned the international claim that we're really trying to draw as part of Project One. We've had a really great article hit 2 weeks ago from ArtNet News I love their headline, 5 new art prize commissions will transform Grand Rapids into a public art wonderland this fall. So we're going to continue to see more of this as we move through the fall in the exhibition, which we're really excited about. My colleague Katie is going to talk specifically to the 5 artists and what they're doing.
Thank you, Jory. So I'm really excited to share the actual artwork that will be coming to Grand Rapids in just about 2 months. So Amanda Browder is a Brooklyn-based artist. This is her. She's probably the one working the most in Grand Rapids as far as our out-of-town artists. She started her process in April of this year, and her process really involves taking donations of fabric from the community. So you can see within this image of past work, like lots of small pieces that build these larger fabric installations. And so starting in April, she started collecting the fabric and then also sewing with the community. So each day, anyone can participate, either come to our central sewing area, or she goes out in the community multiple times throughout the week. So it's a process that really engages everyone to build these beautiful, colorful building wraps. And so this is actually the mock-up for MLK Park and kind of what it'll look like. We'll start installation on this in late August.
So I hate to interrupt, but
yes.
we've got a long agenda, so
Yes.
if we could just move
Yep.
through this quickly.
Yep.
Thank you.
Paula Menta, Ted Lott, 2 local artists. Probably remember them from Site Lab. They've been doing lots of community activations and really responding to architecture and building spaces with DisArt, which is a local disability advocate art group. So they're building a site on Tanglefoot that is kind of stage with ramps and using the whole structure to build a concert performance venue. Heather Hart, another Brooklyn-based artist. This is her. She builds these houses that are rooftops that are also performance spaces that the community is invited to activate, and she'll be commissioning different performers and groups to activate these rooftops throughout Project 1. Olekan Jayfoos is another Brooklyn-based artist. He creates really monumental sculptures. The one he's doing specifically for Grand Rapids is rendering here. Is talking about history of housing discrimination and inequities in urban life, and that'll be placed downtown. And then our final artist is Rafael Lozano Hemmer, who is really big on interactive and tech-based projects. And so he's creating a voice and light installation that will be on the Blue Bridge. And so people will be invited to speak into these boxes and share their messages. And you can see a rendering there. The message will move down the bridge and the light will vibrate with it. And so we're really excited about especially that piece at night. And so site locations quickly. This was an opportunity for us to expand out of downtown, which we were very excited about this year, and activate other spaces. And so MLK Park still worked downtown, and then Tanglefoot, as I mentioned. So we have been working alongside a community group there that's been advising us about performers and the space and the park and the history. And there's more information about that in the packet. Tanglefoot is Site Lab's installation. It's over on the west side. Working to really activate that space, and which has a history of art and art studios there. And then downtown, the sky bridges will be wrapped for Amanda Browder's project. You can see them listed in the bottom right-hand corner. Olekan sculpture will be in front of the AC Hotel. You can see that there. And then events.
Yeah, so with a new event coming, we have a chance to kind of revise our event schedules during Art Prize. We typically have something happening every single day. With this being a 2-month-long event, we don't have the livers to have a party every single night. And so we've decided to really focus just on those 8 Saturdays that will occur during Project 1. So the first day we wanted to make sure that we're shining a spotlight on all 3 of our locations. So we'll be doing a citywide public opening and launch celebration. Things will start at around noon at Rosa Park Circle, where we'll have an official ribbon cutting launching the event. We'll have a headline performance and other performance taking place both on the stage at Rosa and the rooftop that will be in the middle of the circle. The headline performance for that day is a vertical dance troupe coming from California. Vertical dance is these performers rappel off the side of a building and do their dance performance on the side of the building. Not enough money in the world for me to do that. Then the afternoon we'll move things over to MLK Park, where we will have a community celebration featuring local performers. We'll have an artist discussion with the 2 artists that are cited there. We're bringing in local businesses to vend and to just really engage with the community there. We want the community to have a really great sense of ownership to the 2 pieces that will be highlighted there, and a headline performance at the end of that event by Jordan Hamilton, who is a cellist. And then the end of the opening day will take place over on the west side at the Tanglefoot Building, where we'll have an artist panel, and then the headline performance of a group called Drag Syndrome. They will be making their US premiere with this performance. They are a London-based group. And then the second Saturday, just quickly, our friends over at the West Side Collaborative will be returning with their West Side Street Festival. That will take place during the day, most of the day. And then we'll be closing that second Saturday on the Blue Bridge, where we'll be bringing in a electronica artist who will plug into the light system that will be on the bridge and do a really cool performance, a one-off performance on the bridge. Saturday the 21st, things start with a citywide bike ride. We're calling it Pedal Project 1. We've been working with the city to figure out how that route will work, and we're really excited about this event. It's a slow bike ride, it's not a race, so anybody, any age, anybody can participate in this bike event. We'll start things off at Rosa Park Circle. We'll head on over to MLK Park and then hit the Tanglefoot site and then end back in Rosa Park Circle for festivities. Also that day taking place is the African American Art and Music Festival, which is an event that many of you know of that typically takes place during Art Prize on Calder Plaza. So we wanted them to continue during Project 1, and they've moved this event to the MLK Park location on that third Saturday. And then the fourth Saturday, September 28th, DisArt, who is partnering over on the Tanglefoot location, will be doing a sort of performance showcase that they're programming. And then October, we've got a couple rain dates in there because we all know how the fall is here in West Michigan, and we're still kind of working with other community groups, and those October Saturdays will kind of start taking a little more shape as well.
Great.
So now I will turn it on over to Yvette.
So colleagues, as Yvette comes up, I just want to suggest I'd like to go ahead and read the next 2 as well. She will be covering all 3 of these resolutions, and if you have no objections, we can vote on all 3. So the others will be resolution approving the 2019 Art Prize Project 1 venue hosting agreement and a resolution authorizing sponsorship of Art Prize Project 1. And thank you so much for your presentations, everyone. This is so exciting. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. So item 5 establishes the boundaries for Project 1, which are attached to your agenda. It also designates the dates, September 7th through October 27th, and suspends certain ordinances for certain events throughout that time period. Item 6 is the hosting agreement. The city and Art Prize have worked cooperatively on venue logistics. All artwork has been reviewed by the city's Art Advisory Committee, and the agreement reviewed by the Art Prize organization, the city, and the attorney's office, as well as risk management. This year, only one agreement is needed, since Art Prize will be the sponsor responsible for logistics and insurance. And item 7, that resolution authorizes sponsorship of Art Prize Project 1 not to exceed $50,000, which is consistent with what we have done in years past. Sponsorship is important for this event because Art Prize Project 1 will bring lots of people into the community and give mobility the opportunity to talk about mobility options as well as promote parking to diverse communities.
Great. Well, thank you. Colleagues, anything else that you would like to ask? This is a very thorough presentation. Thank you so much, and thank you for the packet. We can start to share it with people. All right. Then, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motions carry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Madam President, let me also express my appreciation to Art Prize. Very unfortunate the media was not here. Well, we still have Justin here, but the cameras, we had so much coverage to discuss violence and what's wrong in the community, and something very positive that puts our community on the international map. So important to our economy, business development. We're talking about spreading the footprint of Art Prize to communities that have not experienced before, consistent with our strategic plan and equity efforts, and hopefully they will pick up on the good news that we've heard this morning. Thank you so much.
Excellent point. Thank you, Manager. Okay, now I'd like to invite Carrie Rivette up. We are going to have a Stormwater Oversight Commission 2018 Annual Report.
And I'm going to hand it over to Elaine Starrett-Isley, who is Chair of our Stormwater Oversight Commission.
Thank you, Carrie. Good morning.
Morning.
So this is our presentation of the 2018 annual report from the Stormwater Oversight Commission. And just as a point of clarity, this covers the calendar year. I have some notes when I'm talking about the fiscal year. So let's see. There we go. The Stormwater Oversight Commission is made up of citizens, 3 representing organizations. I represent the West Michigan Environmental Action Council. We have Ken Yonkers as the Kent County Drain Commissioner, and Josh Lunger is with the Chamber of Commerce, and then each commissioner has appointed their own citizen representative. This annual report covers all of the city's stormwater activities, the required activities under the permit, including public education, maintenance, asset management, soil erosion permits, and additional criteria. This year, 2018, public education continued as part of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant that we received as part of the partnership with the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds, WEMIAC, Plaster Creek Stewards, and Trout Unlimited working in the Rogue River watershed. Maintenance of the city's tree planting and bioswales project at North Park Montessori with 6th to 8th graders was key this year, and those are the pictures that you see there. Since 2016, we have been steadily increasing our investments in stormwater management to bring us to the level of service C. Operations investment are for inspections and maintenance of the stormwater system. Capital investments are made up of both investments made in the stormwater asset management and capital improvement plans, as well as the vital streets investments. Over $740,000 were spent on stormwater investments on Vital Streets project in fiscal year 2018. The investments increased tree canopy by 500 trees and installed multiple infiltration practices throughout the city. One of the more recent Vital Streets green infrastructure installations in 2018 occurred on Granville and Century. And this infiltration practice here produces cleaner stormwater and reduces the potential for downstream flooding and erosion, and it beautifies the right-of-way in neighborhood focus number 26. Okay. This is an example of, of innovative green infrastructure that has been installed on Vital Streets projects. These photos are of Atlas Street. Funding for this was provided through both Vital Streets and Stormwater Capital Funds. The capital improvement projects, a significant portion of capital funds in 2018 went to the Kent County Drain Commissioner for various projects throughout the city. Engineering for daylighting project at Richmond Pond was completed, and the inlet modifications that we're working on in 2019 will restore the concrete bank to the more natural conditions and reduce safety concerns. Several policies were reviewed this year in the Stormwater Oversight Commission. The Green Infrastructure Portfolio Standard was adopted by the City Commission for establishing annual goals for stormwater infiltration and water quality, as well as a way to to create a standard method for tracking water quality benefits. And I do want to remind the City Commission that Grand Rapids is the only city in the country to have one of these. This policy will help the city fully understand the impact that their stormwater investments have created. The Green Infrastructure Technical Specifications, which is also called the Green Book, was also approved by the Stormwater Oversight Commission. The Green Book was completed by a team from Environmental Services, Engineering, and Streets Consultants. Minor revisions were also made to the city's MS4 permit application. The city's MS4 permit has been given preliminary approval and the revised package was resubmitted. We are now waiting for the additional comments that may come from the second review. The city has $2 million in SAW grant funding for stormwater asset management work and community education. We're working with American Rivers, Water Environment Federation, and others on the Great Lakes Protection Fund grant to create and model a off-site mitigation and stormwater credit trading program. This could possibly help developers find an off-site solution if their site will not allow for the additional stormwater infiltration as required by the state of Michigan. We've also begun work on a second 319 grant from the Department of Environmental Quality, now the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, to restore the Alger Ravine on the southeast side. The Michigan Street Joint Project with Spectrum Health, Environmental Services Department, Vital Streets, Downtown Development Authority, and Smart Zone is what you're seeing in these photos right here. In fiscal year 2018, we continued to meet or exceed our interim goals for inspecting gravity mains, force mains, lift stations, and ditches, and this is toward reaching level of service C. Given that we were fully staffed in sewer maintenance for most of the year, we met our goal in catch basins cleaning, and we were under our goal for inspecting culverts, but we will be using leftover SAW grant funds to inventory and inspect those public culverts. And then preventative maintenance includes cleaning and other minor maintenance needs on stormwater assets. The level of service C goal is to clean 20% of the gravity mains, manholes, and laterals, as well as 25% of the catch basins each year. We are slightly below this goal for 2018 in cleaning culverts, but with the system-wide inspection, culverts will be cleaned, to be cleaned will be identified, and our goal should be met for 2019. And to wrap up, once the DEQ, Eagle, issues a draft permit to the Regional Watershed Group, changes to the stormwater ordinances are to be expected. The regional or watershed-based permit has been found to be cheaper for us, and it's better for our watershed. The Stormwater Oversight Commission will provide final recommendations once the agreement is made and for final requirements. So does anyone have any questions?
Elaine, thank you, and thank you so much for chairing this committee. You have done an outstanding job. This is just so exciting to see after all that work with Vital Streets and the residents supporting us and funding the streets has left that allowance for us to really get after this stormwater, these issues, and we've done a beautiful job. I love seeing streams being daylighted and some of these bioswales. It adds a lot of beauty to the city as well. Commissioners, starting over here on my left, do we have any questions?
Great job.
Thank you.
I just have a quick one. Thank you so much for the presentation. You noted the level of service is C.
Correct.
So I'm not sure what that means exactly. Can you help me to understand? I don't even recall it being presented to us before, and maybe it has, and I just don't recall that detail, but help me to understand what C means.
So prior to this was done with our capital asset management plan. We were looking at doing a lot of our stormwater work as it was needed. Level of service C is trying to get us just to ahead of that, so it's starting to look at preventative maintenance. And that includes things like, let's do these inspections, let's do the maintenance before things break down.
Okay.
Level of service C, I don't remember exactly what the percentages were, but that was like the base level to where we get started. We had funding projections for level of service B and level of service A. When I presented this to the city earlier, in cabinet, we did talk about what it would take to get to level of service B, and just really rough using these numbers, which were from 2013, it would be at least an additional $10 to $11 million than we're already spending, which is, we're currently spending $6.6 million.
Okay. So did we create the grades, or is like we did with streets, or are these grades kind of a national category that you all are using?
These were created by the consultants working for this city.
Okay,
So,
great, thank you.
sure.
And glad to know you're having conversations about B and A, and even though we may not have the resources to know what it would take is helpful.
Sure, absolutely.
You're exactly right, Commissioner. I was in those conversations, and we would have loved to be at A, but the cost was exorbitant. Okay. Well, thank you again for your presentation. This is just, we don't have to vote on this, obviously, so we will move on then. And again, please thank to Elaine on our behalf, the rest of the members of your committee. We
I
really
will. We
appreciate
meet
it.
this week. I'll make sure everyone knows.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, now, Commissioners, we can put these next two together because the resolution approving the bicycle plan and the resolution amending the Vital Streets plan go hand in hand because those are the amendments. The amendment will be about the action plan for the bicycles.
So moved.
Support.
And again, I will ask staff to be very brief in their update.
Okay, and Kristen, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, City Manager. Well, 2 weeks ago, we obviously had a more detailed presentation about the Bicycle Action Plan at your July 9th meeting. Just a quick recap, the plan focuses on goals and recommendations that, one, are very responsive to the public, and we were very intentional about our process when we went out throughout the community to reach them where they were at. We are building on the Vital Streets Plan and the Parks Master Plan in particular, but also other planning initiatives like the Age-Friendly Communities process and our area-specific plans. And then more importantly, we're syncing well with the new strategic plan, and specifically the strategic priorities around mobility, safe community, health environment, and engaged and connected community. As you mentioned, we're doing 2 resolutions for your consideration, the adoption of the Bicycle Action Plan, and then also to amend the Vital Streets Plan, specifically the mode emphasis map, so that it syncs more with the recommendations on the network plan for the bike plan. And those recommendations were approved by the Vital Streets Oversight Commission back in November.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, do you have questions about this? I know you all had a chance to read the plan. We got that last week or last time we met and had quite a presentation. So thanks again. We all set? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks for all the hard work you did in putting into this plan, and as well as the Bicycle Coalition and many members of the community who participated and gave us good feedback.
We appreciated everybody's input and their involvement, so
Thanks. Moving ahead, that's good. So next we have a resolution setting a public hearing for August 13, 2019 to consider waivers of the required separation distance from public parks for proposed medical marijuana facilities at 910, aka 928 28th Street Southeast, 940 28th Street Southeast, 1000 Ken O'Shea Industrial Park Southeast, 1109 Michigan Street Northeast, 549 Michigan Street Northeast, and 49 Colebrook Street Northeast. Can I get a motion?
Moved. Support.
Okay. Suzanne, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. We will have a full presentation for you on August 13th as you hear the park waiver. So I'm just going to briefly just to discuss and remind you why this is coming before you. So we had our marijuana ordinance that was adopted on July 24th of 2018, amended in December 18, 2018. And as part of that, we had separation distance requirements from parks and playgrounds. The staff, we went and worked with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. They weren't comfortable granting waivers. The waivers are tied to the property owner location and how we want to hear it. So the commission had discussion during your October work session last year and talking about how these would be handled. And so we adopted a city commission policy on December 4th, 2018, which defined the criteria by which the city commission shall hear these, as well as whether or not that criteria, when we look at it, we look for consistency with the master plan, potential burden on city or other public services, including park maintenance and operations, potential mitigation measures that may be employed by the prospective marijuana facility to reduce impacts on the park, and whether any conditions exist, such as topographic or environmental barriers, which create additional distance from the entrance to the park to where the marijuana facility might be located, which may reduce potential detrimental impacts. And so in looking at this, and we accepted applications in March, March 4th, and we received 6 applications where park waivers would need to be requested. 3 of those are from Kenosha Park, 1 is from Fuller Park, another from Highland, and the last from Belknap Park. They're all from different applicants, and those names are included on page 2 of your memo. And so what this does is just sets the public hearing to hear those requests. We'll have a presentation with the location and maps, and the maps were included in your packet. But we will be able to provide that to the public, and it's on the website. We will be providing notice to surrounding properties that are standard 350 feet. In addition to the public hearing that will occur at the City Commission for this waiver, the Planning Commission ultimately, as part of its special land use process, will be hearing the waiver and making those determinations on the waiver, but they want your input. So they'll be taking your input. You're not officially approving or denying the waiver. You're kind of making that recommendation. It'll go to the Planning Commission. Ultimately, the Planning Commission will decide during their special land use process. But the neighborhood associations, as we were working through the marijuana regulations, requested that there be a public hearing and have the opportunity for input with the commission.
Great. Well, we're going to have some homework, colleagues. So thank you. Do you have any questions about this process? This is just setting the public hearing, and we'll get more information forthcoming.
Just a quick timeline. So if it's coming to, after the public hearing, we'll deliberate at some point, and then it'll go to planning. What's the timeline you're thinking?
So the timeline we're anticipating, so you would have your public hearing, and then you would make decisions or recommendations either at that hearing or on the 27th of August per your normal process. The first hearing that we're expecting that would go to Planning Commission, which would be utilizing a parks waiver, would be on September 12th.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, then all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Thank you, Suzanne. Next, we have a resolution scheduling a special meeting of the City Commission to be held on August 13, 2019 at 2 p.m. in City Hall, City Commission Chambers, 300 Monroe Northwest, for the purpose of consideration of placing a park millage question before the voters.
So moved.
So I'm going to turn this over to Joel Houndorf, our clerk, but remember that we need to get this language to the state on time.
Yeah, so in order to put an item on the November ballot, it has to be approved. The last date to do that is August 13th. So if we approve it at the night meeting, it's after the 4 o'clock deadline. That's why we're having a 2 o'clock meeting that day for this issue. And then the city attorney has been working with the state to review the language. So as soon as I certify that resolution, we'll get that to them, and they should be able to turn that around very swiftly.
Very good. Okay. Any questions, colleagues, about this? Pretty straightforward. Okay, then all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have a resolution authorizing the publication of and setting the date to consider amendments to Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 1 of the Grand Rapids City Code relating to the police and fire retirement system. Can I get a motion?
Support.
Okay. All right, Jeff. Oh, he's not here.
Hi, yes, I'm filling in for Jeff today, Scott Sainton.
All right, great.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I can be brief. This is more of a technical housekeeping item. The amendment changes that come before you will be requested for adoption on August 13th. So as already stated, this is simply authorizing publication of and setting the date to consider these amendments. These amendments basically fine-tune existing language within the city code and do not create any new or enhanced benefits. The subject benefits already exist, and the added language simply clarifies how to go about computing these benefits. The first thing that these amendments do is clarify how unused vacation time is to be converted for inclusion and computation of the final average salary for retiring fire members of the retirement system. This amendment basically ensures parity between firefighters assigned to a 40-hour work week and fire members assigned to fire suppression at that same rank who typically work 24-hour shifts. Effectively, this allows the firefighters assigned to the 40-hour work week to convert additional vacation hours to equate to the same vacation payment amount as fire members assigned to fire suppression. Secondly, what these amendments will do is just clarify that reductions in non-duty related disability benefits apply to fire members hired after July 1st of 2016. And essentially this follows a 10-year vesting schedule with phase-in of this benefit. Any members hired prior to July 1st of 2016 remain subject to the old fixed percentage without the phase-in schedule.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, just wanted to say the left side concurs.
Okay, yes, the left side has been probably sitting at the table listening to this. Thank you so much
Yes.
for serving on the pension board, Commissioner. We appreciate that. Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries, and thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation. Next, we have a resolution approving 1 North Division Avenue lease and sublease. And we have Jana Wallace. Can we get a?
Good morning.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, motion? Good morning, Madam President and Commissioners. It's the end of a long meeting, so I would like to say that I believe my cover memo states everything that you need to know. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, any further questions, colleagues? All right, then I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. All right. Colleagues, we do have to have an executive session around contracts and litigation. We will be meeting this time in room 611 rather than the law offices. So can I get a motion to go into session? Okay. Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
O'Connor?
Yes.
Lanier? Yes. Moody?
Yes.
And yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll see you there.